Welcome back to another episode of the Humans of Developer DAO podcast. In this episode, we're super excited to chat with Colin forward. Outside of the DAO, Colin is a CEO of a company called Ology. And within the DAO, Colin is the partnerships lead. For the DAO, Colin has created and made connections to amazing organizations and companies that has only continued to create opportunities and resources for his entire community to grow. So for this podcast, we give the spotlight over to Colin to learn more about his journey as a Web3 contributor and the leader for the past couple of years. Next, we reflect back on his role as the partnerships lead over the past year, and finally dive into the future of season 1 as we learn more about the different initiatives and projects that are being created by amazing individuals within the DAO. Before we get started, we'd love to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Hedera. Hedera is a public distributed ledger for creating decentralized applications and microservices. For developers, there's various opportunities to create resources through their entire ecosystem of documentation, integrations, SDKs, and various resources. Please check out the description below to learn more about Hedera. Now, let's jump into this podcast and learn more about Colin. See you there. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of the Humans of Developer DAO podcast. Today, we're going to be joined by Colin Forward. Super excited to have him. And Colin, in this podcast, we love to pass the mic over to the guest to give an introduction about themselves and tell us a little bit more about who you are.
Sure. So Colin Forward, I guess I've fallen into running mostly partnerships with Developer DAO, but initially and still I'm the editor for the Developer DAO newsletter. Probably nothing. Probably gonna hear my dog bark here in a second. I run a company called Ology. We started that company something like 12 years ago. I was a computer science student at UCF in Orlando, and we were part of the Institute for Simulation and Training. And I wasn't the CEO when we started. I was just one of the first employees, but have since taken the helm there. And that and Developer DAO are really my primary vocations these days.
Yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more about Ology, if you can kind of expand on what you're building at the company and how you've been able to grow it for the past 12 years.
Yeah, so it's a bootstrapped company. We were basically doing contract R&D for like the first 8 years. We were at a lab studying mobile learning and how that's different from desktop learning. The Cliff Notes version of that is that, desktop learning is great for sitting down to learn how to do something, and then you get up and do it. Mobile learning is great for having that training follow you into your workplace. So I end up working with a lot of people that, are kind of frontline workers. We support a lot of nurses, combat medics, police officers. It's people that need on-demand training, salespeople in the field, that kind of thing. So now we have a mobile training app platform called Capillary. If you go to the App Store and you look up Deployed Medicine, or you look up Stryker's mobile training app, those are all white label training apps built on our Capillary platform. We have something like 200,000 users now on mobile apps. It's doing fairly well. We were one of those weird companies that was really kind of helped by the pandemic. People realized that they had to modernize their training. They couldn't do as much classroom training. And even if they were doing classroom training, they needed to get more out of it. And so they started doing things like mobile apps where you could reinforce the training afterwards, or even like ramp people up to the in-classroom session. And we've been growing pretty steadily. And I'm very lucky that I'm in the position that I'm in. I don't have a board, right? So I don't have the same kind of pressures that some like venture funded CEO might have, and that's a big part of why I'm able to contribute the time that I have to Developer DAO.
That's awesome. So as you're doing this and running a company where you're obviously very passionate about, and you've been able to do it through the will of bootstrapping it, so I can only understand or can only imagine the amount of kind of resilience and pressure you went through when it comes to actually continuing to go that route. Yeah, and I'd love to ask, like, how and why did you choose to spend some time in Developer DAO?
Yeah, well, yeah. So, to your point, there's definitely been those freak out moments where, we're between contracts or, someone just stops paying and, the company's had some existential moments and those have been really stressful. But, like I said, the flip side is that I get uh, this level of freedom. But as far as like why I'm contributing to Developer DAO, why I'm interested, well, um, so I mentioned I was a computer science student from like 2008 to 2013 or something like that, 2012. So that's right when Bitcoin came out.
Mhm.
Um, so I was into it back then. I remember reading Vitalik's blog series in Bitcoin Magazine before Ethereum launched, and it was explaining DAOs. It was just explaining decentralized autonomous organizations, and I read that whole blog post, and I was like, "This is it! Like this guy gets it." And I actually have an email. I think Mark was on it. Wall of Vim, the guy who runs the Writers Guild, uh, close personal friend. I think I sent it to him, but I definitely sent it to at least some of our mutual friends. And I said, this guy's talking about color coins. They were calling ERC20s color coins before Ethereum launched, and just talking about why it was really awesome. And it's funny because back then that was the whole idea was like DAOs didn't have people.
Yeah.
um, but that was what got me excited. And then I followed the whole rise and fall of the canonical DAO, the Slockit DAO, and contributed to. I wrote a book chapter on that whole exercise and how AVSA was like chasing the hacker into the recursive call for withdrawing funds from the DAO and creating sub DAOs, and I think that was 2015. So the whole season that we've been going through of DAOs kind of having their moment has just been exciting because it's people finally trying to realize the vision that got me really excited about Ethereum, about a blockchain that was, had that was a Turing complete platform, right? It is funny now because a lot of the challenges that we work with in this DAO and a lot of DAOs, I think, are like that the interface between the meat space, the real people who are part of the DAO, who are making things happen, and then all the automated pieces, all the DAO tooling, it's still getting stood up. But I, kind of cut to the chase. Mark, who I mentioned is a good friend, is one of the founders, one of the core members of the DAO, and was kind of sharing with a group of friends that he was working on this. And shortly afterwards, I got involved, kicked off the newsletter, and just kind of fell into the MBD and partnership stuff.
That's really awesome. It's awesome to hear that your journey started off with like just reading like an article from Vitalik or whatever it may be, of just actually seeing that sprout and seeing other people interested in the topic, and then for you to get involved right away as well. I'd love to expand on that as well. When it came to your involvement, has it been the same throughout? Because I know in Developer DAO, you're one of the leaders, kind of like bringing the DAO forward. And since your contribution to the previous DAO you were involved with, I'd love to know how your progression in the Web3 space has even like kind of gone about.
Yeah. Well, so, I remember like hounding people like Mark, like, hey, this is really cool. You should get involved. And I didn't realize that Mark would go on to work for the Ethereum Foundation, which is pretty cool. And I'm like super proud of him, and I look up to him in that sense. And seeing folks like him, and then we have other friends that are in the space and have been involved with MakerDAO and some of the groups here in Denver, because there's a pretty big Web3 scene here in Denver. So a lot of startups that have kind of come and gone around that. And even though I was one of the first people I knew to get interested in it, it was like, I think to put a pin in it, it's like Bitcoin was like $60 or something when
Wow.
I was first really starting to get annoying to my friends about it.
Mhm.
And over that decade, I kind of started to feel bad about the fact that I was writing and I was evangelizing and I was sharing it with people, but then I started seeing Mark like working on the Python team, and working like building the Web3 future. And a lot of our friends were doing that. And it took me a long time to finally dig in. And one of the best things about Developer DAO for me has been like I applied to go to DevCon in Bogota,
Mhm.
and I got accepted for the Builder scholarship,
Oh, nice.
which
Yeah.
is like, that was kind of a moment for me because I'd been in this for so long and felt bad about not contributing, even though I cared so much about it and it was something I was really interested in. So it's just been really rewarding to be able to participate and help build things, and like seeing so many people have said that they got jobs in Web3 because of Web3 Con. And, that was one of my first big projects with Developer DAO. So that's something I'm really grateful for.
That's really awesome. I know I was on the phone call recently with Kernza and Daiwa, and we were just talking about where Web3Con could possibly take place next year, whether it's going to
Yeah,
in real life or virtual, which would be really awesome to see like the whole community get together.
it would. Yeah. There's some big ambitious ideas out there. We were really lucky to be able to pull it off the way that we did in GatherTown this first time. I think, ultimately there should be a face-to-face version. So I'm excited for that because, I think the people who are talking about it, some of the ones that you mentioned and some of the others, so I don't know if I should like out them as already being like working on this, but there's some very talented people that I think are going to make the next iteration of that event even cooler.
Absolutely. And I'd love to kind of also mention that when it comes to the previous contribution of Web3Con, that was possibly one of the best experiences that I had when it comes to the whole community because it was all developers. Whether you're part of the DAO or not, it was a great opportunity for you to kind of get involved, meet other people, and just go through discussions, as well as interact with a variety of different companies that are building in the space. Where if you were to go to, Web2 conference or anything like that, you don't really get to do that same engagement, especially from the developer perspective.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, it's another thing I kind of fell into. It was kind of funny actually. I think it was because I was working. The newsletter was the first place we took sponsors.
Mhm.
The DAO took sponsors, and so I was editor of the newsletter, started working with them, and then I guess people were like, "Hey, we have a sponsor for Web3Con. Colin, can you talk to them?" I was like, "I guess. What's the plan?" And it was all just kind of happening. We were building the plane as we were flying it, right? So I'm glad that you had such a good experience. I do think it's important that some of the key folks are recognized for that because there's Sarah. It's Sarah Z.eth. She was just like the MVP. She really made everything happen. Anything that wasn't assigned, she did it. Narb was the kind of the master of ceremonies for the hackathon and the Discord and everything like that. So those two really kind of stood apart. But Josh, who's at Anchor now, Raha got the whole thing started. So I mean, we had a really great team of people that put that on, and I think a lot of them are going to come back and be part of the next version of it. So I'm glad that you had such a good experience.
That's great to hear. And I appreciate you kind of giving them shout outs as well, because they definitely recognize it. I'd love to kind of give and be able to give their story across the board. Definitely looking forward to the opportunity to meet everyone in person, as well as have this community continue to grow. When it comes to the next question I'd love to ask is obviously your experience with the DAO and Web3 was migrated at some point together and merged in side by side. I'd love to ask if you recall that kind of that moment that it happened and how that process happened. If Web3 came continuously continued to grow, but why did you choose to join Developer DAO in the first place?
Um, hmm. So, I mean, my first involvement with Developer DAO was um, I asked Mark, okay, how can I get involved? And he said, well, I think we're going to do this. We should do a newsletter thing. We need to do a newsletter. And there are a few people that were kind of talking about it. And I basically just came in and started editing, just like, hey, why don't we rephrase this or whatever. And to be fair, a lot of the people that were working on it at that point, English wasn't their first language. So, props to them for just diving in. And I mean, even if it wasn't their first language, there's people like Chiron who speak excellent English. But I'd done a lot of writing and editing in the past, and so that was just an easy way to get involved. But one great thing about working on the newsletter is you have to be informed. You have to basically go do the journalism and go find the primary sources, which is mostly in the Discord and the forum, snapshots, that kind of thing, and basically just get a sense of what's going on. And I told Mark shortly after I was just really excited, and he was like, well, yeah, why? Like, what's exciting about it? And I was like, well, I mean, up until this point, the history of being involved in crypto, being involved in blockchain, because the whole Web3 thing is like a rebranding that happened around the same time DD launched, right? That experience was like finding the newest subreddit that had really informed people, like, on the DAO, on r/the DAO, you would see Absa actually like giving a play-by-play of what he was doing to this is Alex Vanderson. He was one of the people at the foundation that was leading kind of like the white hat group. And that was just posted to Reddit. And then eventually everything just turned into like pure degen memes and scammers. And it was just this constant cycle. And it was like a 6-month cycle. You'd find a really good outlet and people were talking about like the new cool shit that was happening in space. And it was exciting. And people were like, pushing the envelope. And then it kind of, the inevitable happened. And so it was just great to see the Discord was full of people who were builders and who were interested in trying new things and applying the newest tech and the newest strategies for using Web3 to make people's lives better or to build products that offer new models for commerce, new models for ownership, new models for identity. And so, yeah, that was really invigorating. And that's what's, I think, kept me around too, because the core team has dealt with some interesting ebbs and flows as far as like the types of people and the types of engagement that are happening in the DAO. And, I think they deserve a lot of credit, and the sort of like ad hoc moderator team that's popped up deserves a lot of credit for just keeping everyone on topic, and the topic being the mission of Developer DAO, which is onboarding new people to the space, education and creating opportunities and doing things that are like, practical and not just self-motivated or motivated by greed.
That's really awesome. Yeah, you definitely touched on quite a few different topics. I think that the way you approached the DAO itself, of just starting off with the newsletter and seeing the value you've been able to give by simply changing couple of phrases, but actually giving value back to other developers to learn more about this entire space and the DAO. I personally know that the newsletter itself, there's a lot of hidden gems you can find in there, whether it's other individuals contributing, reposting about the tutorials they've created. So it's like a huge community, and being able to use that not just as a way to support other developers, but also educate new developers into a space.
Well, all right. So I appreciate you saying that. And I need to be really clear. So I've been around since the first issue. I've been the editor since the first issue, but in that time, the value that the newsletter provides has shifted drastically from my work effort to people like Pauly and Sylvia and Alex, who does all of our Chinese translations. He's ultimately the guy that pushes the publish button now. Everyone knows Pauly is the one that's dropping into the guilds and being like, hey, give me your updates. So he's really like the primary journalist on the newsletter team. So those folks, I've said it a number of times in the newsletter channel, like they've now made it so easy for me. Like, I work with our sponsors and I make sure that we get certain topics covered, just anything that, that may have been missed. But honestly, Paulie, Sylvia, and we get some input from Bobby, Mitchell, who goes by, I think Medusa's brother, and Alex are just like an all-star team. So they've made it really easy on me. I'm glad that people say that it's valuable to them. I've heard several people say that, they'll kind of drift away for a bit and not be as engaged, and then that helps them stay up to date. So I'm glad that we can do that for everyone.
Absolutely. I think the other person that maybe you mentioned it, but Kay as well. Maybe they go by another.
Yeah. So
name.
Kay is the editor for the blog.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been really involved with the Writers Guild for about as long as anyone, and he does a great job. I mean, that is a huge job. He's put in some serious hours.
Yeah.
I've helped out here and there, so I know the level of effort for even just one blog post, but especially like when it comes to having to offer some coaching to like sponsors, where they may come to us with like pure marketing content, and Kay has been really patient and helped them make sure that the content that we're publishing is valuable to our audience, and that it's enriching, and that it's going to teach someone something. It's not just whatever you would find on the sponsor's website. So yeah, shout out to Kay. He does an incredible job.
Absolutely. So one thing that is very clear to highlight is that you have a really good knowledge base of an overview of the entire DAO. It seems that like you are very knowledgeable and understanding of where everyone is, and like obviously the active members, but also showing appreciation to the members that are actually doing different things within the DAO. So I'd love to ask, I know we're headed into season 1, but going back to season 0, what was your biggest takeaway from that, the entire season, from like the start till just kind of the off season? That's a loaded question for sure, but yeah.
Oh man, can we narrow it down a little bit? There's a lot of things that happened. I mean, it was like a year, right?
Yeah. So we can even narrow it down. I'd love to ask, when it comes to your role as working with different partners, how have you been able to approach this new role, especially when it comes to a DAO that it continues to be built as we're actively onboarding many new developers into the space?
Yeah, I mean, I think just keeping the mission first and foremost, like just keeping that front of mind, and putting that out there with in conversations with partners. Because then it's not like I'm like gatekeeping or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure that they understand that my obligation in being the interface between like any partner, any business that wants to get access to our membership and our audience and our comms channels, is doing it in a way that is aligned with the Developer DAO mission. And that, just using that as a like a North Star, has been really helpful. And I think it's made it so that, the people on the other end of the conversation can't get mad at me, because I'm just, as long as we're making sure that it's going to improve the talent and the knowledge of people that are on the receiving end of that content, then everyone wins, right?
Yep.
So we started doing that with Web3Con, because everyone wants to come in, and you have to have, I mean, I guess really started with a newsletter, but even more so with Web3Con, where you're doing like longer form content, and people are doing workshops and that kind of thing. And we're like, look, you can't just come in here and sell. You need to come in here and make sure that the people that you're interacting with feel like they're better and they're more capable because they interacted with you. And again, I think that's in our partners' best interest, because if they can do that, then those people are going to want to use their products and protocols and platforms and the things that they're advertising. So that's been helpful. And again, it's the tone that was set. I mean, Nader has a very he sets a tone in a strong way when with some of the actions that he's taken and the way that he's communicated around this kind of thing. The fact, I can relate to the fact that the core team has avoided taking investment. I mentioned my business has kind of taken the same approach, and I think that has allowed them to really lead with values and principles
Mhm.
and make sure that they're not compromising. And so that's made it easy for me to try and honor that in all the conversations that we have with new members, with potential partners, with anyone that wants to interact with the DAO. And I think that people respect that.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. I think that it definitely has allowed the DAO to be creative and try different opportunities and not just be restricted into one path. So, kind of a follow-up question to that would be when it comes to all the different engagements you've done and led, what's been something that, really comes to mind from season zero that you were really proud of, whether it's a project? I know you touched on Web3Con. Was there anything else that, really sparks?
So there's one that, I mean, so I might be calling you out here. Didn't you go to Miami?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
I did.
So I was actually pretty proud of that. I'm glad that you got to do that. I hope you had a good time.
Mhm.
So that group came to us, and for anyone listening, the context here is the Activate Miami wormhole hackathon. I have like probably one hackathon a day on average approach us, or like one group trying to plan and hackathon and say, hey, I want to work with developer DAO. And it's like in all different shapes and forms. Like we have people that are just like, hey, we just want to promote this on your Twitter and in your Discord, or hey, can you run this hackathon for us, or hey, can you send your members, or whatever it is. And the way that I usually respond is like, look, you have to understand that our inventory as a business, like if we're selling something, our inventory is our members' attention.
Mhm.
And we have to make sure that we are getting the most value out of that attention, not in terms of like the money that's coming in, but in terms of the value that we're returning to our members for paying any attention to any of our channels. And so if we were just like, shilling every hackathon that came to us and was like, here's an opportunity, you just start muting every channel. You'd start unfollowing the Twitter or whatever. And so I credit to the folks at Activate. They have been one of the most creative groups when it came to figuring out how to provide value to the membership. And they went to one of their sponsors, and I feel like a jerk for forgetting the sponsor now. Maybe you remember.
It was the one exclusive to Developer DAO. It was, oh, why am I blanking as well? It was Algorand.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. And thanks to Algorand. So they went and they said, we're going to take a part, that might go towards bounties or just funding the hackathon or some other thing. And we're going to put a travel fund aside for developer DAO. And I was like, brilliant. You're creating opportunities for people to go and learn and hack and build. And like, that's the whole point. If you can do that, great. You're doing a service to our membership, and we'll promote it. And, and I'm glad that you got to go. I know that someone else was awarded the scholarship, and I think they ended up not being able to travel, but that was something where like, I've used that as an example several times, is like, look, there are a lot of people that are going to want to work with us, or that are going to want to like tap into this audience. And we just have to make sure that whatever we do, we're doing it in the best interest of our members. And we did that, and it worked out. So I do feel pretty good about that one. There are a lot of examples of that in Web3Con, just different ways that sponsors were able to participate and offer opportunities. So yeah, overall, I think just kind of leaning into that, it has been the biggest takeaway from partnerships in season 0.
That's really awesome. Yeah, thanks for mentioning the opportunity that I had a chance to go there. It was definitely a great experience. It was my first time traveling in 3 years,
Wow.
post-COVID, everything like that. So it was definitely a very rewarding experience, especially going to Miami for a hackathon, and especially because it was Web3. So it was a really cool experience overall.
That's awesome. I'm
Yeah.
really glad to hear it.
I'd love to ask the next question when it comes to your mentality headed towards season 1. I know like you mentioned, there's a lot of different companies that are approaching us for the community that we have. And obviously, it goes back to everything you touched on. It only matters about the partnerships that are created if, and correct me if I'm wrong, if the developers are able to get benefits of actually learning, of expanding their knowledge base, whatever it may be, in some sort of way, but bring back value to the developers themselves, not just the organizations. So I'd love to know what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, You mentioned Krinza and Brian, who are running our DevRel efforts, and some people are confused when they hear that Developer DAO has a DevRel team because they think, well, what are you promoting? And well, we are working with our partners to make sure that they are communicating in a way that is enriching to our membership. That's the whole thing. And so we have our partner leads that work directly with our sponsors, and they're kind of they're like an accounts manager. Bobby's definitely been the MVP for season 1 on that front. And we have some other people stepping up now, but Bobby and the other partner leads are coordinating with Krinza and Brian's team to make sure that fulfillment happens, to make sure that the sponsored blog posts and the podcast and all the different deliverables, the workshops, the Discord AMAs happen and that they're good. Mm-hmm. And so Naz, who was leading the MBD Guild for a while, he came up with this really great idea, and he just kind of like dropped it and ran. And I've been kind of beating that drum since. But he said, we should have a DevRel incubator where we're working towards establishing some definition of excellence in that field. It's kind of an emerging discipline, right? It's something where there's not a whole lot of like documentation about what makes a great DevRel, and people think like, oh, well, you just need a big Twitter following, or you need to be able to go viral or whatever. But I think that we have a lot of people in Developer DAO. I've joked for a little bit, like we had to be careful not to become DevRel DAO, right? Because so many people were getting jobs in DevRel. And I think that's because we have such a focus on education. And so, what Krinza and Brian are really looking to do, and I think Brian's actually kind of taken ownership of the whole DevRel incubator effort, is define a standard for excellence and create experiential learning opportunities for people who are interested in DevRel, to work with some of these big partners that we're bringing in, get some mentorship from people who do have experience in those roles. And in that way, we make sure that we are providing value back to our sponsors and helping them really improve their DevRel operation, improve the way that they're communicating, because we're providing that connection to their audience in a really direct way, like an AMA and a Discord, where it's like a live conversation and they're getting that feedback. So I think that, beyond just making sure that the content is valuable, we're kind of building up some of the infrastructure and the talent base that we have in the DAO, to make sure that happens no matter what. So that if a partner comes to us and they don't have really experienced DevRels, they're just handing us marketing material, we can go, okay, we can work with this, but we're going to make you better. And we're going to do it by making sure that this is more valuable to develop DAO members.
Yeah, I think Brian and Krinza, I can definitely attest for. They've both been very active within the DAO, especially when it comes to season 1 and the big plans that they have, especially with this new approach of actually emphasizing and placing emphasis on teaching people to actually become DevRels. It's really interesting how a lot of the active members did become DevRels in the space. And that obviously goes back to because of the fact that everyone loves education and being able to kind of bring and onboard more people into the space.
I have to admit, I was like kind of doing a little cheer when I saw that Daiwat was going back to coding. We're yet to see, what that looks like, but I'm very happy for him, and always excited that that we have people who are diving back into the hands-on building, especially since I don't do a whole lot of it myself.
Yeah, fair. So one thing I'd love to ask is, when it comes to Developer DAO and the whole Web3 space, what's something that you would say which should improve the next season, especially as there's a lot of FUD, or a lot of kind of the noise that has stopped. It's been more focused on continuing to emphasize on the growth.
Yeah, I feel like people who have been around for a while in the space tell you that like the best stuff gets built in winter, and crypto winter. So I imagine that'll probably be somewhat true for us as well. I don't think anyone's terribly concerned about the speculative aspects around developer DAO, like what it's worth, because ultimately what it's worth is what someone gets out of it if they can join and help, and it helps them take the next step in their career. So I think that I have a lot of respect for our paid operators in season one, Kemp and Chuck and Wickest, Victor. And I say that because, so Eric and I actually wrote the initial job descriptions for those positions. And it was like shortly after they accepted those positions that there were a bunch of changes where it was like, yeah, so I know we agreed to this, but like, what do you guys think about focusing on this? And so, for example, there were some expectations in the fundraiser role where we said, hey, you're going to go out and find some amount of money, because we wanted to have discrete KPIs that people could live up to. We wanted to have accountability for these paid positions. But Chuck and Wickes made a pretty astute observation that like just going out and finding money wasn't necessarily going to be the most valuable thing for the DAO in the long run. The best thing was going to be to set up the infrastructure, to set up the expectations for organization or for initiatives that were looking for DAO support to get funding, setting up the other side of the pipeline. How are we going to qualify funding opportunities and match those up with the right people in the DAO? So I think in that sense, we're building a lot of organizational infrastructure. And if someone is looking for, a unicorn to come out of season one, or, a bunch of funding or whatever it might be, they may get impatient. They may find themselves waiting for a while. And I have no doubt that projects like Perks and like Eden are going to be successful. I have no doubt that the School of Code or DD Academy or whatever direction it goes is going to be a really important part of the value that Developer DAO offers to its members. But we have to be patient, and we have to give people a chance to invest in our organization. So I think that is just that would be a good thing for the membership to keep in mind. You see a lot of people, especially since the code drop, that come in and they're like, why is the code price tanking? And everyone's kind of like, who cares? And that's just kind of like an extreme example of the type of like eagerness that someone might bring when they're looking at some of the projects that we're working on right now. And we're really lucky that Web3Con, we kind of like, got by just improvising the way we did it. And it turned out to be a really great event, because I didn't even mention Dan. Dan was doing all the speaker coordination, and there's like a lot of just great programming that came out of it. But in the long run, we're going to have to make sure that we're very deliberate and we're giving people the time to invest in these important projects, because ultimately, I think it will be a really powerful launch pad, and a good way to match talent with the projects that need it, that are incubating in the DAO. And hopefully in season 2 and season 3, those processes are a little bit more streamlined. And right now we're building the foundation for those things.
Absolutely. I think you touched on a lot of different projects that I am very bullish on. I know the School of Code, for example, is a great example. Perks of these small projects that started off as for fun, but just start to develop because people start to be so committed. And that just goes to speak to the eagerness and like the passion of the members within the DAO, of actually just committing time to something greater that will provide value and a lot of tremendous value in the future, but not right now. One of the things I'd love to kind of cover as well.
I will say,
yeah.
So almost all those projects I mentioned will have some value to offer members, I think, in season 1. Okay. School of Code launching their MVP. Perks already has a bunch of really badass partners lined up. Like in Fura, I always kick myself when I mention these two together, but like in Fura and Alchemy, like useful perks to offer to our membership. And Eden, I think, is already making some waves and forming early partnerships with other DAOs. So we do have to be patient. We just have to be realistic. But those are all kick-ass teams that are going to be creating really awesome MVPs. So we will, I think, I'm confident that there'll be something to show for it in season 1.
100%. Okay, sounds good. So one thing that I wanted to cover too, I know we talked about DAO, developer DAO, and covered, your company. I'd love to ask when it comes to yourself and all the awesome stuff you're into. I'd love to know if there's anything you're really passionate about, that, you'd love to spend time on a Friday night or like a Saturday morning doing, just to get to know Colin a bit more.
Yeah. Well, my world kind of revolves around my 16-month-old daughter right now. Sophia is just an incredible blessing. And when you're asking about like how I manage my time, I think that it might be counterintuitive for some people, but having a kid and like just being has really focused me. My social life has changed. It's not gone, but it's still much more. Everything is kind of lined up around making sure that I can provide a good life for my daughter, and we're hoping for more kids, but I think it's just given me some additional discipline, and it's helpful to work on things like developer DAO that do give me like I feel like I'm contributing to something important in the same way I do when I'm working on my company. So that's been helpful. As far as like what I like to do for fun, we live out here in Denver, so into the outdoor stuff. That's kind of why we moved here. Hiking, biking, snowboarding when it's season. My creative hobbies are cooking and photography. So anyone wants to check out my photography, the Instagram handle is the same as my Discord handle, forward with a 4. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I keep busy. I've been trying to read more. And I have a colleague that I really respect who is like always saying like, you owe it to yourself to read 30 minutes a day. And I think he's right. And so I've been trying to do more of that. Especially fiction, because it's just for some reason, like after college, it got hard to find fiction that I was interested in. But yeah, so that's kind of it. Sophia, and then everything else.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Yeah, you clearly have done so much in the past year that I've heard of you and known of you, but to kind of dive deeper into all the different things you're actually having to do, as well as raising a 16-month-old baby, that must be a very busy life. But it's awesome to hear you're really enjoying everything you're doing and you do it with a meaningful perspective.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, and we're lucky. Sophia's an easy baby. She lets us sleep most nights. And like I said, people think that it's going to be that, oh, you don't have any more free time, but like it really focuses you to spend the time that you do have more meaningfully.
That's awesome. So that wraps up the podcast. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It was awesome to give the opportunity for everyone to learn about your story and everything that you're actively doing within the DAO, but also kind of your hopes and projections and predictions for season 1 as we start to ramp up.
I really appreciate it. And I mean, I'm so glad to hear about the experience that you had in Miami. And I really appreciate you taking the time to have conversations like this so that we can all get to know each other a little bit. Because I kind of joke with my wife and with Sophia when I went to Dubai and when I'm going to DevCon, like, hey, these are my internet friends. I get to see people in person. So I think that this is a great outlet. I appreciate you doing it. And I'm sorry for everyone I didn't mention, because there's no way to mention like everyone who contributes to this DAO. It's such an incredible community. But thank you all. I love you all. Thanks for working with me and letting me contribute.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Colin.
All right. Have a good one.